This lesson is create a C# application. The objectives for this lesson are to create a C# application that reads from a tab-delimited product file, converts each line in the file to a product, adds each new product object to an array, and prints out each object to the console using the ToString method. Let me provide you with an overview of what we're going to build in this C# application. We're going to add on to the product class. We're going to create a public method called GetProducts to which you're going to pass a file name, and it's going to return to you an array of product objects. The first thing it does is call another method called ReadProductFile to which you'll pass in the file name, and it will then return to us an array of all of the lines in that file. It then passes those lines to a ProcessProductLines method, which then returns us our products array. The ReadProductFile method, we accept the file name. It's going to return a string array. Now this is going to be a private method. We don't need to see this outside of the product class. We're first going to check to see if the file exists. If it does, we'll read all the lines in the file, put them into an array, and return those. If it doesn't exist, we'll throw a file not found exception object. We're also going to check to see if the file is not too large, and if yes, we will throw a file too large exception. We're then going to create the ProcessProductLines method to which we get that lines array from the file, and it's going to return to us then an array of product objects. And again, this one just needs to be private. We're then going to iterate over each line in the file, and we're going to use the split method on each line. Then that creates that array that we're going to use the values in that array to create a product object, and that object is then added to the array that we then return from this method. We'll then modify the program.cs file and create an instance of our product class and then call that public method called GetProducts, passing in the file name of where that tab-delimited set of products is located, and it's going to then return the product array to us. We will iterate over that products array and display the product information. Before we build the application step by step, let's take a look at the complete application already done. The products.tsv file is a tab-separated values file of product information. The first part, 706, is the product ID. The next piece after a tab there is HL road frame-red, 58. That's the product name. Then there's a tab, and there's 1059.31, and then there's a tab, and there's a 1500. Obviously, that is the standard cost and the list price. And then there's a couple of dates. So this is our tab-separated values file that we're going to read in. Let's take a look at the program.cs. So inside of here, we're going to do a using on our C# samples. Remember, that's the namespace in which the product class is located. I have my file name here, which is going out to my d:/samples folder, and it's going to read in that products.tsv. I create a new instance of my product object, and then I call entity.getProducts, passing in the file name, and it returns to me an array of products. I can then iterate over that list of products and call the ToString method on that product object. When I run this by pressing F5, we'll see all of the data now put into the console window. Now the console window doesn't have a big enough buffer to show all of the products because there's about 294 of them in there, but you get a good representative sample of what everything looks like. Next, let's take a look at the product class itself. And down here you'll find our public method, GetProducts, that returns that product array. Now if you look inside of here, I've put the error handling in here, and inside of the try block is where we call ReadProductFile and ProcessProductLines. And then we're catching some specific exceptions. Was the file not found? Was the file too large? Or just any other general exception. Then there's the read product file that you see here, and this is the one that actually goes out and reads. It also checks to see if the file exists, and if the file does not exist, you can see on line 76, we throw a new file not found exception. Here's the code to check the file size. There's the code to process the product lines, and we're going to go through each one of these individually, and then finally the ToString. We're going to build the methods in our product class one by one. We're going to start out with a real simple method called CheckFileSize. Using the application that we've been building throughout the whole class, open up the product.cs file and go all the way down to the bottom, and inside of here is where we're going to add our CheckFileSize method. What it does is you're going to be passed a file name. We're going to set the file stream fs equal to null, and then we're going to do a try, and we're going to try to open it, and then we'll check the length. And I'm checking for 100,000 bytes or less. If I get a length that is greater than that, I'm going to throw the new file too large exception. So it's just like what we did in our last example there. And we're going to pass in the fs.length for the file length. We then close that file stream. And that's all there is to the CheckFileSize. Now, this is a good example of building a C# application where each method does one thing and one thing only. The next method we're going to look at is the one to read the product file. So let's take a look at this method. In the product class, let's add another method. This one will be called ReadProductFile. It's going to accept a string value, which is a file name, and it will return an array of strings. Line 42, we're going to check to see if file.exists on that file name. If it does exist, let's now call the CheckFileSize method we just wrote to ensure the file is not too large to open. I'm not going by any certain amount of bytes. I'm just trying to utilize all of the things we've learned in this course so far. Then on line 46, I'm going to use a file class. Now we've done the file class, right? We did the file.open. Now we see the file.exist method. Now we see another one, file.readAllLines. What it does is it goes out to that file name and attempts to read all the lines in the file, and what it returns back to us is an array of every single line in the file. Now, if the file does not exist, we throw the new file not found exception. So there's the ReadProductFile method. So we have a couple of really nice small methods. They do one thing and they do it very well, and then they're done. Let's add one more now called ProcessProductLines. Add another location where you can add a method into the product class. This one's going to be a private method that returns a product array, and it's called ProcessProductLines. We're going to pass in the line array, the string array that we get from the last method that we developed. I'm going to declare a couple of variables here, a product array and an array list. Then I'm going to iterate over the lines in that lines array. So each time through I get this item, and what I'm going to do with that item is I'm going to take it on line 46 and I'm going to use the split method to look for all of the tab characters. What that does is it gives me a string array of all of the properties that we need to fill in for each product object. So now that we have that, we do a products.add on a new product, and then this is a positional thing. Entity subscript 0 is the product ID. Entity subscript 1 is the name. Entity subscript 2 is the standard cost. Entity subscript 3 is the list price, and so on. You have to be careful to make sure that you always have the right data, or if there's any null data, it comes at the end. Otherwise, you could have a little bit of an issue. I know that this file is correct, so I know that I can do it positionally like this. Now, this isn't always the best way to do things, but I'm trying to keep it simple and trying to keep it with all of the things that we've learned in this class. Now, on standard cost and list price, you probably should make sure that the value in there you can convert to a decimal. Otherwise, you could get an error on those two lines. You could even get an error on the product ID by just converting it right away. So you might want to maybe do an if statement to check and make sure that you can convert it prior to doing the convert to int32 or the convert dot to decimal. Cell end date I know can actually be null, so I'm going to check for that here on line 54 where I do a string.isNull or empty on entity 5. If that is true, then I'm going to go ahead and give the cell end date the datetime dot min value. Otherwise, I will convert to a datetime that entity 5. Finally, once I have iterated over all the lines and built this products array list, on that products array list, there is a toArray method. We pass to that type of, which we use to get the type of some entity. So in this case, product. We're saying, give me the type. The toArray then knows how to cast all of that data into an array of that type, but I still have to apply the final cast right up here at the front. That gives me back my product array. So wow, a lot of stuff going on in that one little line there, but this is something that you're going to do a lot of. You get the types of things so that the method that you're working with knows what data type it's expecting, and it can then do the appropriate whatever it needs to do underneath the hood to turn that into some other thing. In this case, turning an array list into a product array. Let's now write the GetProducts method, which is the one that we're going to call from the program.cs. Once again, let's add some space where we can add this method in the products class. And on line 41, public product array GetProducts, passing in a string file name. We'll go ahead and initialize the product array RET, set it equal to null, and string array lines. This is the only place that you've seen so far where I'm putting a try in, because if you remember, there were other areas down in those methods that I wrote that I was throwing exceptions. Well, this is where I'm going to now catch them, is right here in this method. So I'm going to try to read the product file. I'm going to try to process the product lines. And as we know, we could get a file not found exception. We could get a file too large exception, or maybe something else happens and we get some other generic exception. We're going to get the lines back from reading the product file. We're going to pass those lines to the ProcessProductLines and get that return value back, which is our product array. And that's finally what we return from this method. The last thing I want to do is provide a ToString method on the product class so that when I do a console.writeLine on a product object, it will call the ToString and return all the information that I want. Now, personally, I like putting the ToString as the last method in my class. So I go all the way to the bottom here and I write the ToString. It is an override of the built-in ToString, which is on the object class, because all classes, whether you know it or not, actually inherit from object. So we're overriding the ToString on that. And inside of here, I'm going to use a string builder. I'm going to, on line 21, append line name dash, and then in parentheses, the product ID. I'm then going to put out the cost and the price and the profit. I'm then going to do the start selling on a certain day. And then I'm going to check to see if the sell end date is equal to datetime.min value. Remember I said that that one could be null. And when it was null, I filled it in with a datetime.min value. That's how I know it isn't there, because there should never be a selling end date with a minimum date value. So then I would display no selling end date. Otherwise, if it was there, I'll say end selling on, and I would spit out that sell end date. And then I could also call that method we wrote called get number of sell days and display the number of days that it will sell. Okay, we've got everything done in the product class. Let's now go back to the program.cs. Let's build that array of products and then display them. Open up program.cs and let's add some code. The first thing is put your file name in and point it to the folder in which you've put the products.tsv. Then on line 4, let's create an entity variable that's of the type product. And then on line 5, let's do entity.getProducts, passing in the file name. It's going to then return to us an array of product objects. Then on line 7 for each, product item in products. Line 8, console.writeLine item. And when you do that, that's what calls the ToString. All right, let's see if we've got it working here. Let's go ahead and run this. And look at that, it works. We got all of this data being displayed on the console. If we were to step through this, let's set a breakpoint here, and now we run this, we can actually walk through the code. So I'm going to hit F11 here to step in. We see the file name has been passed in. It now goes to read the product file, checks to make sure the file exists, then calls the CheckFileSize, opens the file, checks the length is good, closes up the file stream, comes back, reads all the lines in this file. So if we hover over RET right now, you can see an array of 294 separate lines. And if you look there, you can actually see the /t everywhere, right? So you can see the /t, and that's the tab character. Great, so we'll return that. And now we can process the product line. So we iterate over, we get the first line in item here. We apply the split. The split then has broken into the entity. As you can see, it's an array of 6 elements. These 6 elements have each of the pieces of information that we need. 0 is the product ID, 1 is the product name, 2 is the standard cost, 3 is the list price, 4 is the start selling date, and the selling end date. We then take each of those values and we build a new product. If we now look at products, we can actually see that now that array has been converted into a product object. We repeat this. I'm going to set a breakpoint down here until we have our complete products array built with 294 product objects. And we convert all of that to an array. And now we return that. We return this, and now we can iterate over each product item. And each time I'm going to press F11 here. It's going to call our ToString, builds up our string builder, and it returns that value. Now, if we hover over item right now, okay, we can actually see this is what it's going to display on the console. Press F5, and again, it runs through and gets all of the products, and they all show up. I have many full-length courses on my YouTube channel. C# fundamentals, object-oriented programming, minimal web API development using MVC, start and run a successful business, and lots more coming. Please subscribe to my channel, Paul D. Sheriff. Do you know why you should subscribe to YouTube channels? You'll get notifications when new videos appear. You'll get recommendations for related channels. It helps the channel grow, which allows me to create more videos for you. It helps attract others to my channel. Your like helps others find videos that are good. So please take the time to like and subscribe to my channel, Paul D. Sheriff. In this lesson, we added new methods to the product class. One of those methods read product data from a tab-delimited file. We learned a couple new methods on the file class, like file exists, file read all lines. We then converted that file data to an array of product objects. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this course. Hopefully you've gotten a good foundation for C# programming. I mean, you have learned most of the syntax needed to program in C#, and you kind of got a good taste for object-oriented programming. We introduced you to data types and how to manipulate them. You saw how to work with exceptions, and then we brought it all together by writing an application. Well, that proves right there you got all the things you need to start developing C# applications. So where to go from here? Well, I'd highly recommend you learn more about the C# object-oriented programming capabilities. You'll probably want to dig in and learn some specific technologies now that will go along with C#, such as web programming, like working with MVC, Razor Pages. Of course, you also need a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Also, some web API programming. Maybe you want to build some web APIs. Desktop programming. Maybe you want to build something to run on a Windows desktop like WPF or Windows Forms. Maybe you're going to do some universal Windows platform programming, or some cloud programming in Azure. Maybe some game programming with Unity, or maybe even some mobile development with .NET MAUI. Whatever you do, you now have the foundation needed to start learning these specific technologies. Best of luck to you, and thank you for watching my course.